So you want to talk a little bit about Uniswap? Um, so you were a staff engineer there up until recently. So how were they were using Tamagui when you started, and kind of what was the relationship that y'all had, and how did that form? Yeah.
Yeah, they brought me on because they were decided to use Tamagui and reached out. And I had left Vercel not long before, and thought it was a great chance to prove it out because they're very design driven company, very product driven, and I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, I have nothing but great things to say about Uniswap. They're a great company. Like they really crush at caring about their products being good. They're using Tamagui now. It's powering everything. It's actually they're even sharing a lot of, because before it was mostly like the extension that they launched, which is kind of a Chrome sidebar extension, and the native apps share almost everything. So they're sharing like 90% of code using Tamagui, which is really cool. But the website is a little bit, it's like kind of a legacy stack that's been around much longer. So we helped them get that, and I think a few of the pages now are fully shared, and not only that, but they actually are fully sharing the swap widget, which was huge. That was like a big thing that they wanted to try, and I think turned out to be a success because their main thing is swapping, right? Uniswap, and that widget is sort of the meat of it. And they had all these different features, like the native apps supported this thing that the website didn't, and they were always having to plan to keep them sync, like launch across them. And yeah, so now they are fully moved. I helped them move into a mono repo, which was a huge lift. And then yeah, it was a lot of fun work for me. I mean, it was kind of the time we got, and but I think that showing that it can be done and it can be done well, and it's hard. It does require it requires a team that is good and knows what they're doing and can debug all these issues. And so I think that's kind of leads into almost one, which is like the biggest source of complexity I think in sharing code is the fact that you have like two different bundlers, two different routers, two different sets of ways to configure things with two different frameworks, two different sets of documentation to refer to. Like it's just so many things. And so that's where one comes from, it's turning two into one. And I do think like, yeah, Uniswap is great and they pulled it off, but like not many can. And so, but I do definitely tell anyone that wants to like, if you're a doctor and a hater, you think that native can't produce a great app, like they prove it.
So you were saying that one stack kind of came about from your work at Uniswap. Was it when you were supporting that like static page versus like app stuff, or like how did it come about?
I mean, in a way, it's like it's almost inevitable because we were also selling Takeout, which is the Tamagui starter kit that is Next.js glued together with like React Native using Solito, which is Fernando Rojo's library that he's a good friend of mine. And yeah, like that stack also 100% of the problems that we got basically from people coming in were just, I mean, have to be it just so complex to deal with all these different pieces. And so yeah, I think it was both. Like Uniswap, obviously, we moved together all these apps and code, and it was just like you can just clearly see how much simpler it would be if you could bring them into one framework. And then same thing, yeah, the takeout, like it was really almost hurting me on a deep level because it was like, man, this could be so much simpler. Not that, I mean, I think it was the best we could do. It's one of those things where it's like it hasn't been solved yet, I think, in a way. So but yeah, I mean, it was clear that that was the way to go. I think like probably some of the lore is that, well, we did the VXRN at which was just the Vite serving React Native library that I showed at VConf, like the last one basically a year ago. And that was just an experiment. Like I was just curious because, Metro is like, yeah, one of the creators of Metro asked me to kill it. Like that's like Metro is a great project for it works really well and like at what it does, which is like native bundling and like, at Meta and like for Meta, it's been very kind of introverted. I don't know what's the right word. It's like it's a very like focused on, what Meta is needed project in a sense. And it's also like, for web it just didn't even work until very recently, I think, at all. I mean, even until very, very recently. I haven't tested the latest versions, but like I think even like the code splitting was like technically working, but not really. Like we had a friend who was using, because I think the obvious other project in this space that kind of is doing a universal thing is using Metro, and that's Expo Router. And we were already exploring kind of should we do a framework and like how do we build it. And I think to us, Metro wasn't really like there was no way I was going to be able to build a framework on Metro, because I think you have to have access to the Metro team and like sort of get them to do what you want. And like I just I'm not gonna ever have that. Whereas Vite to me is just it's so amazing. Like, and I had with Tamagui compiler we had Vite exposure where I had built like the Webpack plugin, the Metro plugin, and then the Vite plugin for Tamagui. And like the Vite one took like a day and a half compared to like the other ones taking just like months. I mean, and again, I'm not to throw shade, but like the Vite plugin system is a work of art. Like, I mean, yes, there's complexity in that they're dealing with roll up for production and not roll up for development, and there's always that. But like the actual design of the plugin API and all the services too, like the documentation, the types, the JS documentation, like all of it is better than any project I've ever done. That's for sure. Like it's just immaculate. For example, Vite 6 actually is helping us out a lot too, because Vite 6 introduced this new environment API where you can like easily configure multiple environments, include because like I think Vite 5 basically and forward assume there's only two, like client and server SSR. And then there's React Server components coming out, there's React Native, but there's also like people have more than two environments, so they've added this environments API. But even that, like, it just blew me away at how they had this huge documentation RFC page with like a big PR, and the docs in that RFC were like better than any docs I've ever, what I mean? Like just the docs for that like environment API RFC were beautiful, like so detailed, so much work went into it. They iterated on that API a bunch of times. So I'm just a Vite maxi. Like I think that they really know how to like build open source and how to like design it and how to document it and how to, and like, it shows they have, 60,000 stars or something crazy. And so to me, like, it was like, if I can do Vite, that's like kind of ideal, like first principles, Vite is like the bundler I would choose. And so that was, I did this experiment with VXRN. Sorry, I'm getting wordy here. But yeah, like VXRN, it went well. Like React Native is hard. It's very hard to build for. I think not necessarily on like a like yeah, most of the work I think of this framework is getting it to bundle and work with Vite for React Native, mostly because Vite is ESM focused, which is kind of ironic because React Native doesn't support ESM at all. So it's like, how do you do that? And so that was kind of a big part of it. I'll leave that for if we want to poke in, but I think the next things were basically once we proved that out at VConf last year, we took a little break. I still wasn't really sure. But I sort of like, yeah, I had a friend that was like using Expo Router. They were complaining that they had a 10 megabyte JavaScript bundle. And I was like, interesting. Like they still haven't figured out code splitting, and also just like, I think it was a fun project. Like, I think it was fun to sort of figure out, like, can we do this? Like, how hard would it be? And to Expo's credit, like, I will say that like, one did start. I mean, I sort of feeling things out and trying to figure out if we want to do this. So part of that experimentation was me taking Expo Router, just some of the core of it, and just saying like, can I get the file system routing to work with our VXRN library? Because that would be the next step, and then like sort of got that working and kind of kept going from there. And so we've diverged, quite a bit, but like, I will say like, some of that core, especially some of the, just like the file system routing logic that takes like, some of the, like, you'll notice that we're very similar, and that's on purpose. Like we, I think we're using open source, like we're using React Navigation, which I think does like majority of sort of that hard work of the router. And then we're using some of the file system routing scanning stuff from Expo Router. And then obviously we've added a bunch of other things and done a bunch of other things like loaders and SSG, SSR, SPA type style routes. Like we wanted to port the tamagui.dev site over, which is kind of, it was a full featured Next.js app that had like generate static params, and it had like, get server side props and all this stuff. And so we needed all that too, which was like kind of table stakes. So we had to implement all of that stuff ourselves. And so, yeah, I feel like we've got somewhere where like we have like a bunch of stuff. Like we were able to port the tamagui.dev site over, have it fully work, and I also not degrade the Lighthouse speed or the like next page speed and all that stuff like at all. And that took a lot of work. Like we had to get perfect no waterfall loading. We had to get perfect hover preloading for the next page, and preloading of assets. And there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Like it's actually, I think, it's a beta stack, but it's fairly robust in a way.